"Get your truck off my property," Brenda screamed as she blocked my own driveway with her SUV. 14 hours on base, boots still on. All I wanted was to park and go inside. Instead, my neighbor stood there shaking her keys at me like I was a trespasser. "This is my driveway," I said, too exhausted to argue. "I don't care," she snapped. "You people don't belong in my neighborhood." Then she pulled out her phone and called base security. "Send someone now. This contractor is threatening me." The guards arrived minutes later, lights flashing, radios crackling. Brenda folded her arms with a smile, certain she'd finally won. What she didn't realize was that the man she was trying to have removed was the one she files her reports to. And that call she made, it didn't remove me, it summoned her. What would you do if someone tried to have you kicked out of your own driveway? Marcus Thompson, 45, 20 years Air Force logistics, now civilian contractor on the same base where I once wore the uniform. Divorced 6 months ago. She got the house. I got this place. A small ranch next to military housing, first property I've ever owned outright. And damn if that doesn't mean something after losing everything else. I restore a 1967 Mustang in my garage during evenings after 14-hour shifts. The smell of motor oil mixed with Creedence Clearwater Revival keeps me sane. Reminds me there's still beauty in fixing broken things. Simple pleasures for a simple man trying to rebuild his life. My neighbor, Brenda Whitfield, base housing coordinator, who thinks marrying Staff Sergeant Dale makes her a general.
Dale's deployed, so Brenda runs this neighborhood like her personal kingdom.
Picture this. Bottle blonde with acrylic nails that could cut glass, driving an SUV with Army wife vanity plates. She hosts these coffee mornings that reek of vanilla candles and sound like character assassination sessions for anyone who doesn't fit her perfect military wife vision. First week here, she brought cookies with that sweet smile I was stupid enough to trust. "Welcome, we're all military family here," she cooped, "and I actually believe we might be neighbors instead of enemies." Then I parked my work truck on the street. Completely legal, mind you, and found a pink note on my windshield the next morning. Contractor vehicles, lower property values. The paper still smelled like her vanilla perfume, like she'd sprayed it just to mark her territory. I ignored it, because I'm not looking for trouble, just trying to live my life. Second note came highlighted in pink, listing city ordinances about commercial vehicles that didn't even apply to my truck. Day 3, she cornered me at the mailbox with that fake concerned neighbor voice. "This is a military community. We have standards." When I mentioned being former military myself, she practically sneered. Contractor isn't the same thing. The way she said contractor made it sound like a disease. Week 2 brought the real ambush. Special HOA meeting. Every resident invited plus me. The only contractor in a room full of people who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. I walked into that community center and saw 30 folding chairs facing a projector screen where Brenda stood clicking her laser pointer like she was briefing generals instead of gossiping housewives. Maintaining community standards was her PowerPoint title, and the first slide showed my truck. Certain vehicles create unprofessional appearances that affect all our property values, she announced. Second slide was my house, photographed from her bedroom window like some kind of surveillance operation. Some residents don't understand our military culture of pride and presentation. She never said my name, didn't need to when I was the only target in the room. The questions started flying. What can we do about this contractor problem? Can the HOA make new rules? Should we call his supervisor? 30 people discussing my life like I was some pest problem they needed to solve. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while coffee grew cold and chairs creaked as neighbors avoided looking at me directly. When Brenda finally asked if I had anything to say, I stood up feeling like I was defending myself at a court-martial. I follow all regulations. I'm a good neighbor. That's all I've got. The applause was weak, guilty. The kind you give when you know something's wrong but don't want to make waves. Walking to my truck afterward, gravel crunched behind me, and Chuck Martinez Burr, retired Marine from 3 doors down, caught up. "That was bullshit," he whispered, looking around to make sure nobody heard him defending the contractor. Some of us remember what serving actually means. His handshake was the only real human contact I'd had all night. But here's what really got me. Every slide in Brenda's presentation had timestamps. Every photo was dated and cataloged. She'd been building a case against me from the moment I moved in, like I was some kind of security threat instead of a guy trying to start over. That weekend, things got worse. That Sunday morning, I was under the Mustang's hood when voices echoed in my driveway. A landscaping crew stood around my oak trees like they were planning an execution. The foreman, weathered hands holding official-looking paperwork, seemed genuinely confused. "Got a work order for tree trimming on Mrs. Whitfield's property line," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. The documents looked legitimate: county letterhead, official stamps, notarized signatures. But those trees had been planted by the previous owner 20 years ago, a solid 8 feet inside my property line. "Those aren't her trees," I said, wiping grease off my hands with a rag that wire of motor oil and honest work. "Lady's got documentation saying they're encroaching. City requires removal." Right on cue, Brenda materialized from her perfectly manicured hedge like she'd been waiting for this moment. She'd dressed for battle, pressed khakis, crisp button down, hair pulled back in her official business bun. The manila folder in her hands might as well have been a weapon. "I filed proper boundary adjustments with the county," she announced, spreading documents across my truck's hood like she owned the place. "These trees clearly encroach 2 feet onto my property. City ordinance requires immediate removal at your expense." Her bureaucratic tone suggested this was just paperwork, nothing personal, but her smile said otherwise. I examined the survey document and felt my stomach drop. Professional graphics, official seals, notarized signature. It looked completely legitimate. The property line it showed put my trees squarely on her side of the fence. Either my deed was fraudulent or someone had gotten very creative with modern technology. "I'll need to verify this with the county before any work begins," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. 20 years in logistics had taught me that when paperwork doesn't match reality, someone's running a scam. "You do that," she smiled with the confidence of someone holding 4 aces. "But the work order is effective immediately. Removal begins tomorrow at 8 sharp. The crew looked as confused as I felt, but they had their orders and Brenda had paperwork. In their world, official documents trump common sense every time. I watched them pack equipment while calculating the damage, lawyer fees, survey costs, time off work, not to mention the emotional toll of fighting your neighbor over your own property. Brenda had chosen her battlefield expertly. That night I called the county recorder's office, then did what any good military logistics guy does when facing superior intelligence. I gathered my own original property survey, photographs of every tree from multiple angles, precise measurements from the fence line. If this was going to be a paper war, I'd come armed with documentation. Monday lunch break found me at the county courthouse, folder in hand and suspicions growing. The clerk, a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain, pulled up my records and frowned at her computer screen. "That's interesting," she said, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Mrs. Whitfield filed a boundary dispute 6 months ago that was never processed, then submitted it again last week with different measurements." She turned the monitor toward me, revealing 2 separate filings with completely different property lines. The first showed correct boundaries. The second, dated 3 days earlier, had been conveniently altered to support her tree removal scheme. "She comes in here frequently," the clerk added quietly, checking that we weren't overheard. "Always filing complaints about neighbors. We've started requiring extra verification on her submissions." I remembered something my divorce lawyer had told me during my own legal nightmare. Always demand certified copies of property documents before allowing any work to begin, because forgeries cost hundreds to verify. but thousands to fix after the dam. Age is done. That advice was about to save more than just some trees. I hired a certified surveyor that afternoon, paying $300 from my Mustang restoration fund. It stung, but not as much as losing trees worth $5,000 in property value. The surveyor's report confirmed what I suspected. Those trees sat entirely on my property, and Brenda's documents were either grossly inaccurate or deliberately falsified. Here's where the mini twist hit. When I posted the real survey results on our neighborhood Facebook group that evening, the response wasn't what I expected. Instead of angry neighbors demanding answers from Brenda, I got private messages, lots of them. She tried the same thing with our fence line last year. She filed complaints about our dog that don't match city records. We've been dealing with her harassment for months. Turns out I wasn't Brenda's first victim, just her most recent. She'd been running property scams and filing false complaints throughout the neighborhood, but everyone had been too intimidated or embarrassed to speak up. My survey results didn't just prove she was wrong about the trees, they gave other victims the courage to come forward. By midnight, that Facebook thread had 23 comments from neighbors sharing their own Brenda stories. The woman who thought she'd isolated me had accidentally exposed her own pattern of harassment. Sometimes the best defense is just refusing to stay silent. The Facebook revelation should have been Brenda's cue to retreat, but not. Narcissists don't learn from public embarrassment. They double down. Tuesday morning after my night shift, I turned onto my street to find 3 cars positioned like chess pieces, perfectly blocking my driveway access. Not illegal since they sat on public pavement, but arranged with the precision of someone who'd studied my schedule. I recognized the vehicles, Brenda's book club cronies, who'd ignored me for weeks, but suddenly had strong opinions about contractor parking. Knocking on doors at 7 a.m. felt like begging, but exhaustion makes you desperate. Same scripted response from each woman. We're legally parked, first come, first served. The coordination was obvious, the cruelty deliberate. Brenda appeared as I trudged back from the third rejection, her vanilla perfume mixing with the crisp autumn air like expensive warfare. Having parking troubles, she cooped, keys jangling in her manicured fingers. I've started hosting weekly literary discussions. My friends adore our charming neighborhood. They'll probably visit regularly now. Every Tuesday, same time I get home, I noted. What a delicious coincidence. Her smile could have frozen Aunt Irene's. Community engagement is so vital, don't you think? I parked 4 blocks away that night, hauling my gear through streets that crunched with fallen leaves and suburban malice. The walk home gave me time to simmer, and simmering led to remembering something my old Air Force commander used to say: there's always a regulation that cuts both ways. You just have to find the right paperwork. Wednesday lunch break found me at City Hall with a mission. 20 years managing military logistics teaches you that bureaucrats worship paperwork almost as much as they hate being outsmarted by civilians who actually read the fine print. I requested information about residential parking permits, something I'd noticed buried in my property deed documents. The city clerk looked like he'd been dispensing parking wisdom since the Carter administration. Your street qualifies for resident permits if any property owner requests them, he explained, pulling up municipal codes that glowed green on his ancient monitor. $25 annually restricts street parking to permit holders only during posted hours. My old commanding officer's voice echoed in my head. The most effective warfare happens in administrative offices, not battlefields. I walked out with application forms and the satisfaction of someone who just discovered the perfect legal weapon. The permit application needed signatures from affected property owners, plus legitimate justification for restriction. I had both documented driveway blocking and Chuck Martinez eager to sign. About damn time someone fought her with her own tactics, he grinned, scrawling his signature like he was endorsing a declaration of war. City Council rubber-stamped my permit request Friday with bureaucratic efficiency. The permits arrived Monday along with official permit required 8 a.m. 6 p.m. signs that I installed directly in front of my driveway, with the reverence of someone planting a flag on conquered territory. Tuesday evening, I stationed myself at my kitchen window, like a sniper waiting for targets. Brenda's book club arrived punctually, parking in their usual formation without noticing the shiny new signage. 6 cars sitting illegally in a freshly designated permit zone looked like Christmas morning to any revenue-hungry parking officer. I didn't make the call myself. Didn't need to. City parking enforcement runs regular sweeps of permit zones, and clustered violations practically scream easy money to ticket officers working quotas. The symphony started around 8:30. Car doors slamming, voices rising in disbelief, heels clicking on asphalt as 6 women discovered orange citations decorating their windshields. Their book discussion had apparently shifted to more immediate literature. Municipal parking code violations, total damage, $1,200 in fines for what Brenda had smugly called perfectly legal street parking. My doorbell chimed 20 minutes later. Brenda stood on my porch clutching a parking ticket. Her face flushed the color of her usual pink accessories. The smell of her vanilla perfume couldn't mask the scent of desperation. "Fix this immediately," she demanded, waving the citation like a weapon. "These are public streets. You can't create your own private rules." "Actually, the city creates the rules," I replied, producing my permit approval paperwork with the calm satisfaction of someone who just checkmated their opponent. "I simply followed proper procedures to implement existing regulations, same process you used for your creative tree survey." Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the moment she realized I'd beaten her at bureaucratic warfare using her own playbook. "This isn't finished," she hissed, but her threat carried less conviction now that her friends were out $1,200. Walking back to my house, I caught the aroma of Chuck's barbecue drifting across the evening air, mixing with the sound of normal neighbors living normal lives. For the first time since moving here, my driveway felt truly mine. Sometimes victory smells like properly filed municipal paperwork. You'd think $1,200 in parking tickets might humble someone, but Brenda Whitfield operated on a different logic. When Plan A fails, escalate to Plan Nuclear. The morning after her book club's expensive parking lesson, my supervisor's voice crackled over the phone with words that make any contractor's blood freeze. "Marcus, report to my office immediately. We need to discuss some security concerns." Chief Warrant Officer Reynolds sat behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict, sliding a manila folder across the scratched government tissue surface. The thing bulged with official forms, each bearing Brenda's increasingly familiar signature in royal blue ink that somehow managed to look vindictive. "Base security has received multiple reports about suspicious activities at your residence," Reynolds said, his tone carrying the weight of someone forced to investigate a friend. "These complaints suggest possible security risks that require immediate review." My hands shook slightly as I flipped through the documentation. Complaint after complaint, each more creative than the last. Contractor maintains irregular work schedules suggesting possible unauthorized activities. Unidentified visitors arriving at unusual hours for unknown purposes. Loud mechanical noises during evening hours potentially masking illegal operations. Chemical odors emanating from garage area consistent with improvised explosive manufacturing. That last one hit like a physical blow. 20 years of honorable service, and this woman was painting me as a potential terrorist because I restored cars and worked night shifts. The dates revealed a chilling pattern. She'd been building this character assassination for weeks, while I thought we were just neighbors having petty disputes. "Sir, these reports are about my work schedule and hobby restoration." I managed fighting to keep my voice professional while my career hung in the balance. "The visitors are delivery drivers. The noises are automotive work. The chemical smells are WD-40 and Bondo filler." Reynolds nodded with the expression of a man caught between believing a subordinate and following protocol. "I know you, Marcus, but formal complaints demand formal investigations. Your security clearance renewal comes up next month. And these allegations," he gestured at the folder, like it contained evidence of war crimes. They complicate everything. Walking back to my workspace felt like a perp walked through my own office. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Coworkers suddenly found their computer screens fascinating, and the coffee machine area cleared when I approached. In the contractor world, security investigations spread like plague. Association with someone under review can contaminate your own clearance status. That evening, I stood in my garage breathing the familiar cocktail of motor oil and metal polish that used to represent peace. After brutal workdays, now these same smells felt like evidence in Brenda's fabricated case against me. Every wrench, every can of penetrating oil, every restoration manual could be twisted into something sinister by someone determined to destroy what little stability I'd rebuilt after my divorce. But 2 decades managing military logistics teaches you something valuable about investigations. They're only as credible as their underlying evidence. If Brenda wanted to weaponize documentation, I'd demonstrate how professionals collect legitimate proof. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all contractor-related complaints submitted to base security in the past 2 years. The familiar bureaucratic dance felt oddly comforting. Government paperwork operates on established rules, unlike neighborhood harassment campaigns. When the results arrived 3 days later, via encrypted email, the pattern that emerged made my chest tighten with rage and vindication. Brenda hadn't just targeted me. 4 other civilian contractors had suffered her systematic character destruction over 18 months, each following identical methodology. Reports of suspicious behavior followed by security concerns escalating to unprofessional conduct. David Owen, a communications specialist, had actually lost his clearance and career after Brenda's campaign poisoned his reputation beyond recovery. The coordination was methodical, deliberate, and absolutely vicious. She was systematically purging civilian contractors from the neighborhood, using her administrative position to weaponize security protocols against anyone who didn't fit her vision of military community purity. During lunch breaks of that week, I connected with Brenda's other victims, building a network of survivors who'd been too isolated or intimidated to resist before. Their stories carried the same heartbreaking themes: harassment disguised as patriotic concern, followed by official complaints designed to destroy livelihoods and families. Fighting institutional predators requires understanding their methods. Document everything meticulously. Connect with fellow victims for mutual support. And never fight alone because bullies depend on isolation to maintain power over their targets. This approach had helped David Owen rebuild his career elsewhere and was about to save mine from similar destruction. The breakthrough came through discreet security cameras positioned legally around my property to capture Brenda's obsessive surveillance activities. The footage revealed behavior bordering on stalking, photographing my house at various hours, measuring my fence with a tape measure at midnight, coaching neighborhood children to damage my lawn for evidence creation. The most damning video showed her crouched behind decorative shrubs at 2 a.m., using a telephoto lens to photograph my garage windows, while simultaneously filing noise complaints about the same time frame. Federal harassment was about to meet federal consequences. The next morning, I was filing routine logistics reports when my supervisor mentioned something that made me nearly dump scalding coffee across classified documents. "By the way, Marcus," Chief Reynolds said, stirring sugar into his own mug with the casualness of someone discussing weather, "we've got a position opening up in base housing coordination. Thought you might be interested given your background." The words hit like a physical blow. Base housing coordination? Yeah. Current coordinator has some serious performance issues we need to address, he continued, completely oblivious that he was discussing my personal nightmare. Job requires military logistics experience, active security clearance, strong people skills. Honestly, after working with you these past few years, you'd be my first recommendation. I gripped my coffee mug to hide trembling hands my brain scrambled to process this bombshell. Brenda's position was opening up, and I wasn't just qualified. I was apparently being headhunted for it. The woman systematically destroying my life had no clue she was harassing her potential replacement. What kind of performance issues? I managed, aiming for professional curiosity while my heart hammered against my ribs. Reynolds pulled up personnel files, squinting at his monitor with the expression of someone reading a particularly disturbing crime report. Let's see here. 47 formal complaints filed against her in 24 months. Discrimination in housing assignments, abuse of authority, creating hostile work environments. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline as he scrolled deeper. 3 official reprimands for exceeding scope of authority, plus an active investigation into whether she denied housing to an interracial couple based on personal biases. The irony crashed over me like a tsunami of cosmic justice. While Brenda was fabricating complaints against me, her own file documented genuine misconduct that would horrify any military administrator. Her campaign to remove me from her neighborhood was inadvertently building the case for her own termination from the job I could inherit. Timeline on this position opening? I asked, fighting to keep desperation out of my voice. Review board convenes in 3 weeks for final determination, Reynolds said, clicking through more damning documentation. Between us, it's not a question of either. She'll be terminated. Just how quietly command can handle the transition. I excused myself and escaped to the parking lot where October air carried the sharp scent of dying leaves and new possibilities. Sitting in my truck with windows down, letting cool breeze clear my head, I realized Brenda's entire harassment strategy had been built on catastrophic ignorance about military personnel procedures. She'd been filing complaints against contractors without understanding that contractor evaluations cross-reference with civilian position eligibility. Every false report she'd submitted had actually highlighted my professionalism by contrast. While she abused complaint systems, I maintained perfect work records and security clearance status. More devastating, every discriminatory comment about contractors, every abuse of housing authority, every violation of fair treatment protocols had been meticulously documented by the same system she'd tried weaponizing against me. The woman who thought she was playing strategic warfare had actually been committing professional suicide in slow motion. Her personnel file read like a masterclass in career self-destruction, systematic discrimination, authority abuse, environment hostility, and harassment of civilians supporting base operations. I remembered Colonel Hayes's words from my last evaluation. Marcus, your attention to detail and calm professionalism under pressure make you ideal for positions requiring fair treatment of diverse populations. Generic supervisor praise at the time. Now, it felt prophetic. The position would be mine on merit alone, but Brenda's misconduct created additional urgency for command to install someone who could restore housing operations credibility. Every complaint she'd filed against me documented my restraint while exposing her violations of military standards. Walking back inside, I felt power dynamics shifting like earthquake fault lines. In 3 weeks, I wouldn't be defending against Brenda's harassment. I'd be conducting her termination interview as her new supervisor. The report she filed all went to her future boss. That revelation hit like lightning, striking twice in the same spot. I wasn't just defending my reputation anymore. I was positioning for the job that would make Brenda report to me. But surviving her attacks wasn't enough. I needed to prove I deserved that housing coordinator position through competence, not just cosmic irony. My garage became mission control that evening. Instead of working on the Mustang, I spread documents across my workbench like a general planning invasion. The familiar smell of motor oil mixing with printer ink as I built a timeline of Brenda's harassment. Every incident, every witness, every piece of evidence organized with the precision that had made me successful in military logistics. The overhead fluorescent light hummed while I worked past midnight, creating the case that would either save my career or destroy hers. Chuck Martinez, Knocked on my door the next evening carrying 2 beers and a knowing smile. Heard through the grapevine. "You might be moving up in the world," he said, settling into my garage with the comfort of someone who understood warfare. His classic rock collection drifted from his own workshop next door. Creedence's Clear Water Revival mixing with autumn air and the distant sound of base aircraft conducting evening operations. "Need to document everything properly first," I explained, showing him my evidence files. 20 years Marine Corps taught me bullies understand one language: overwhelming documentation. Chuck nodded, studying my timeline with professional interest. "We're going to catch her being exactly who she is, and that's going to be enough rope." He helped me position additional security cameras within legal boundaries, sharing techniques he'd learned in military intelligence about evidence collection that would hold up under scrutiny. The installation took 3 hours, but watching Brenda's future surveillance activities would provide footage that even the most sympathetic review board couldn't ignore. Base legal assistance proved crucial when Captain Sarah Williams reviewed my growing harassment file over coffee that tasted like government-issued determination. Military installations maintain zero tolerance for discrimination, but you need clear evidence of systematic pattern and deliberate intent, she explained, flipping through documents that painted an increasingly damning picture. What you've assembled demonstrates both targeted harassment and abuse of official authority. I discovered that base housing coordinators operate under strict federal guidelines about fair treatment, and Brenda's contractor complaints violated multiple regulations regarding discrimination in military communities. Every false report wasn't just harassment. It constituted potential criminal violations of federal anti-discrimination laws that could result in prosecution rather than simple termination. My outreach to other targeted contractors revealed the true scope of Brenda's systematic campaign. David Owen, the communications specialist she'd destroyed, agreed to testify via video conference from Colorado, where he'd rebuilt his career after losing security clearance. "Her lies about my conduct cost my family 8 months of financial instability," he said during our encrypted call, voice carrying the weight of someone still recovering from institutional betrayal. "If my testimony prevents her from destroying other families, I'll gladly participate." Community engagement started accidentally when I helped elderly Mrs. Patterson with yard work after noticing her struggling with heavy leaf bags. The sharp scent of autumn decay mixed with her gratitude as word spread that the dangerous contractor actually spent weekends helping seniors with maintenance tasks. Soon I had regular requests for small favors that built genuine relationships with neighbors who'd only known me through Bren. Das propaganda filter. These conversations exposed Brenda's true neighborhood manipulation. She'd been controlling housing assignments to cluster supportive families while systematically isolating dissenting voices. Military families feared complaining because she controlled their living situations, while civilian homeowners faced targeted harassment campaigns designed to force relocation. Professional preparation intensified as the review board approached. I researched every aspect of base housing operations, identifying efficiency improvements that could save significant taxpayer money while addressing discrimination complaints more effectively. The bitter irony wasn't lost that Brenda's harassment had given me comprehensive understanding of exactly what needed fixing in housing coordination systems. Colonel Hayes agreed to discuss my career development interests over coffee that carried the aroma of opportunity mixed with nervous anticipation. I presented housing improvement proposals with calm competence, demonstrating systematic thinking rather than personal vendetta motivation. "Marcus, these recommendations show exactly the leadership approach we need in housing coordination," she said, reviewing documentation that reflected months of careful preparation. "You should definitely consider applying for positions in this area." Chuck helped me practice maintaining professional demeanor under aggressive questioning using role-playing scenarios where he'd launch increasing, hostile accusations while I responded with measured professionalism. She's going to come at you like a cornered animal when she realizes what's happening, he warned between practice sessions. Your job is staying cool and letting her destroy herself with her own behavior. By month's end, I'd evolved from harassment victim into qualified candidate with comprehensive improvement plans, supporting witness network, and documentation that would impress any review board. More importantly, I'd built genuine community relationships that would serve the position regardless of personal satisfaction. Brenda's isolation campaign had backfired spectacularly, forcing me to become more connected and competent than ever before. Brenda's world started cracking the moment she discovered I'd applied for her position. 3 days before the review board meeting, she appeared at my workplace like a vengeful spirit materializing from bureaucratic hell. The base security desk called my extension with barely concealed amusement. Marcus, you've got a visitor in the lobby who's demanding to speak with your supervisor about national security concerns. I found her pacing the marble floors like a caged predator, her vanilla perfume mixing with the institutional smell of government buildings and barely contained rage. She dressed for battle. Power suit, fresh manicure, hair pulled into what I'd learned to recognize as her official authority bun. But something was different this time. Her usual composed mask had slipped, revealing the desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed kingdom crumble. There he is, she announced loudly enough for every civilian contractor and military personnel in the lobby to turn and stare. The man who's been stalking my family and threatening our security. Her voice carried that particular pitch of manufactured hysteria that sets off alarm bells in anyone who's dealt with genuine emergencies. Chief Reynolds appeared within minutes, drawn by reports of a disturbance involving one of his contractors. His expression shifted from professional concern to barely disguised irritation as Brenda launched into a rehearsed speech about my escalating dangerous behavior and obvious security risks to military families. Ma'am, perhaps we should discuss this in my office, Reynolds suggested. But Brenda was beyond caring about appropriate venues. This man has been conducting surveillance on my home, she declared, pulling out printed photographs that showed my security cameras. He's documenting our daily routines, threatening our children's safety, and now he's trying to infiltrate base housing operations. The irony was spectacular. She was accusing me of surveillance while holding photographs she'd taken of my property from various angles and distances. Several contractors and military personnel exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing someone's complete psychological breakdown rather than a legitimate security briefing. Mrs. Whitfield, Reynolds said, with the patience of someone dealing with a particularly difficult child. These are serious allegations that require proper documentation and investigation procedures. Making scenes in public areas isn't the appropriate. Brenda's voice rose another octave. What's appropriate is removing threats to military families before they escalate. This man doesn't belong here and everyone knows it. The racial undertone wasn't subtle, and the silence that followed felt heavy with collective discomfort. Several African-American contractors in the lobby stiffened, recognizing exactly what kind of doesn't belong rhetoric they were witnessing. Security arrived to escort Brenda from the premises after she refused to lower her voice or move the discussion to a private office. Watching her being led away while continuing to shout accusations about my obvious guilt and conspiracy to infiltrate military operations felt like watching someone detonate their own reputation in real time. The aftermath proved more damaging to her than any evidence I could have gathered. Word spread through the base community with the speed that only military gossip achieves. The housing coordinator had made a public scene, hurled discriminatory accusations, and been removed by security while making unsubstantiated claims about a respected contractor. My CO workers' reactions ranged from supportive to amused, but none seemed concerned about my actual threat level. Man, what did you do to piss her off so completely? asked Tommy Rodriguez from the supply office, shaking his head with the wonder of someone who'd witnessed epic self-destruction. But Brenda wasn't finished. That evening, she launched a social media campaign that made her previous Facebook complaints look restrained. Posts appeared on every neighborhood group, base spouse forum, and local community page she could access, each one painting me as an increasing threat to community safety. The posts grew more creative and desperate as hours passed. Contractor conducting surveillance on military families, unknown individual infiltrating base security systems, dangerous men threatening children's safety in military housing. Each post included carefully cropped photos of my house, my truck, even my security cameras, presented as evidence of malicious intent rather than defensive measures. The campaign backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying support, her post triggered an avalanche of responses from people who'd witnessed her workplace meltdown or experienced her harassment firsthand. The comment threads became testimonials about Brenda's own problematic behavior, with neighbors sharing stories of her discrimination, harassment, and abuse of authority. Chuck posted security footage of Brenda measuring my fence at midnight with the caption, "This is what actual surveillance looks like." The video went viral within the military community, generating hundreds of comments about her obsessive behavior and questionable mental stability. By midnight, Brenda had deleted most of her posts, but screenshots lived forever in the digital memory of a community that had finally seen her true nature exposed under pressure. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had instead revealed her own instability to everyone who mattered. The review board meeting was still 2 days away, but the outcome felt inevitable. Brenda had just demonstrated exactly why she needed to be removed from any position involving authority over others. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Brenda Whitfield had just realized she was trapped with nowhere to run. The morning after her social media meltdown, I discovered her final desperate gambit when a process server appeared at my door with legal documents that read of desperation and vanilla perfume residue. Marcus Thompson. The server looked apologetic as he handed me papers that felt heavy with malicious intent. "You're being served with a temporary restraining order and emergency injunction filed by Brenda Whitfield." My hands trembled slightly as I read allegations that would have been laughable if they weren't potentially career-ending. According to Brenda's sworn statement, I had engaged in escalating stalking behavior, threatened her family's safety through systematic surveillance, and created a hostile living environment designed to intimidate military families. The restraining order demanded I stay 500 feet away from her property, cease all surveillance activities, and remove security cameras that violate her family's privacy. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, exactly 1 day before my housing coordinator interview with the review board. The timing wasn't coincidental. Brenda was trying to derail my candidacy by painting me as a dangerous stalker who required court intervention to control. I called Captain Williams immediately, my voice probably betraying more panic than a 20-year veteran should display. "Sarah, I need legal representation for a restraining order hearing that could destroy everything we've built. Bring me every piece of documentation you have," she replied, with the calm confidence of someone who'd seen these tactics before. False restraining orders are serious business, especially when they're designed to interfere with employment opportunities. That afternoon, we spent 4 hours in her office, organizing evidence that told a completely different story than Brenda's dramatic narrative. Security footage showing her conducting surveillance on my property, documented timeline of her harassment campaign, screenshots of her deleted social media posts, testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed her obsessive behavior. "Marcus, this isn't just about defending against false allegations," Captain Williams explained while reviewing Brenda's restraining order petition. "This is about demonstrating to the court that she's been systematically harassing you, then using the legal system to continue that harassment. Other methods failed." The night before the hearing, I sat in my garage with the Mustang, breathing the familiar smell of motor oil and steel that had become my sanctuary during this nightmare. Chuck appeared with 2 beers, and the kind of grim determination that comes from watching a friend face institutional warfare. "Tomorrow's going to be rough," he said, settling against my workbench. "She's going to come in there with tears, victim rhetoric, maybe even bring character witnesses who don't know the full story." I know, the beer tasted like liquid courage mixed with resignation, but we've got truth and documentation on our side. "Sometimes that's enough," Chuck nodded. "Sometimes judges see through the performance to what's really happening." Thursday morning arrived with the crisp bite of October air that made everything feel sharper, more consequential. The courthouse smelled like old wood, fresh coffee, and the nervous sweat of people fighting for their futures. Brenda arrived with a small entourage of supporters who clearly believed they were helping an innocent victim defend herself against a dangerous stalker. Judge Patricia Morrison had the weathered expression of someone who'd presided over countless domestic disputes and could smell manufactured drama from across the courtroom. She reviewed Brenda's petition with the careful attention of a professional skeptic, occasionally glancing up to study both parties with evaluative eyes. "Mrs. Whitfield, please present your evidence of threatening behavior," Judge Morrison instructed, and Brenda launched into a performance worthy of community theater. Her testimony painted me as an escalating threat who'd progressed from property disputes to surveillance to workplace intimidation. She presented photographs of my security cameras as evidence of stalking, described my presence at neighborhood events as threatening, and characterized my housing coordinator application as proof of my obsession with controlling her life. "Your Honor," she concluded with perfectly timed emotion, "I fear for my family's safety and need the court's protection from this man's obvious instability." Then Captain Williams stood up and systematically destroyed every element of Brenda's narrative with documented evidence that revealed the true predator in this relationship. Security footage of Brenda measuring my property at midnight, timelines showing her initial harassment, screenshots of her discriminatory social media posts, testimony from other contractors she'd targeted. The judge's expression shifted from professional skepticism to visible disgust as the evidence mounted. When Captain Williams presented Brenda's personnel file, showing systematic discrimination complaints and abuse of authority, Judge Morrison's patience finally snapped. "Mrs. Whitfield, this court finds your petition not only without merit, but deliberately frivolous," she announced with the authority of someone who'd seen enough lies for one lifetime. "The evidence clearly shows you've been the aggressor in systematic harassment of Mr. Thompson. Your restraining order is denied, and you're ordered to pay his legal fees totaling $2,400. But the judge wasn't finished delivering justice. The monthly base housing town hall meeting had never seen attendance like this. Word about the restraining order hearing had spread through military communications faster than classified intelligence, and the community center buzzed with anticipation that felt electric enough to power the overhead fluorescent lights. Base Commander Colonel James Mitchell sat at the head table alongside Colonel Hayes and the Housing Review Board, while local military newspaper reporter Staff Sergeant Jennifer Owen positioned herself with notebook ready to document whatever was about to unfold. I arrived early, settling into a middle row with Chuck beside me and Captain Williams nearby for moral support. The familiar smell of government-issued coffee mixed with floor wax and nervous energy as families filed in, many stealing glances between me and the empty chair where Brenda usually held court. The tension felt thick enough to cut with my old combat knife. Brenda made her entrance 15 minutes late, clearly expecting the dramatic impact of arriving after everyone was seated and waiting. She dressed for what she obviously anticipated as her moment of vindication. Power suit, fresh manicure, hair styled into her most authoritative configuration. But something was wrong with her usual commanding presence. Her vanilla perfume couldn't mask the desperate edge that comes from someone fighting their last battle. "Before we begin tonight's regular business," Colonel Mitchell announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. "We have some personnel announcements that affect this community directly." Brenda straightens in her chair with the confidence of someone who thought public vindication was finally arriving. Her small group of supporters, the book club ladies who'd paid parking fines, and a few neighbors who still believed her victim narrative, arranged themselves nearby like a protective formation. "Effective immediately," the base commander continued. "We have a new base housing coordinator. Please welcome Marcus Thompson, who brings 20 years of military logistics experience and demonstrated commitment to fair treatment of all military families." The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, pregnant with explosive potential. I stood to acknowledge the appointment while scanning faces in the crowd. Some surprised, many supportive, a few clearly confused about how the dangerous contractor had suddenly become their housing administrator. Brenda's face cycled through emotions like a malfunctioning traffic light: confusion, disbelief, rage, and finally a desperate fury that made her voice crack when she jumped to her feet. "This is impossible," she declared loud and oog. For the military reporter's pen to start moving rapidly across her notebook. "You can't promote someone under investigation for security violations. This man has been harassing my family for months." Colonel Hayes stood with the calm authority of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. "Mrs. Whitfield, as of this afternoon, you are no longer employed by this installation. Your termination is effective based on systematic discrimination, abuse of authority, and filing false official reports." The words hit Brenda like physical blows. "You can't do this. I've served this community faithfully for 8 years. This is retaliation because he filed complaints against me." "Actually," I said, standing with the measured calm that 20 years of military bearing had taught me, "I never filed any complaints against you. Your termination is based entirely on your own documented actions and the formal investigation they triggered." Staff Sergeant Owen's pen moved faster as she captured what was becoming a textbook case of public self-destruction. Several families had their phones out recording what would undoubtedly become base legend within hours. "This is discrimination." Brenda's voice reached a pitch that made fluorescent lights seem to flicker in sympathy. "You're all targeting me because I tried to maintain community standards, because I stood up to people who don't belong here." The racial undertone wasn't subtle, and the collective intake of breath from military families who'd served alongside the diverse colleagues for decades made the air itself feel heavy with disapproval. "Ma'am," I said with the professional courtesy that had served me well in logistics negotiations, "my office door will be open to address any legitimate housing concerns through proper channels. Our community succeeds when everyone feels welcome and fairly treated." The applause that erupted wasn't polite or obligatory. It was the sound of a community relieved to finally have leadership that represented their values instead of personal prejudices. Families who'd been afraid to speak up against Brenda's authority were suddenly free to express what they'd felt for years. Security stepped forward as Brenda continued her increasingly incoherent protests about conspiracies and discrimination. Her book club supporters quietly gathering their belongings and edging toward exits. The woman who'd commanded this room for years was being escorted out while the community she'd tried to control applauded her replacement. "My first priority," I announced to the room as Brenda's voice faded down the hallway, "will be ensuring that every family in base housing feels respected, supported, and valued regardless of background or status." Standing ovation. 200 military families on their feet clapping for the idea that housing coordination could actually serve everyone fairly. Sometimes justice sounds like genuine applause replacing years of fearful silence. 6 months later, I sit in what used to be Brenda's office, though, I've completely redecorated to remove any trace of vanilla-scented authoritarianism, reviewing quarterly housing satisfaction reports that tell a story of remarkable transformation. The numbers speak louder than any victory speech. Discrimination complaints dropped from an average of 12 per month to 0. Housing assignment wait times decreased by 40% through efficiency improvements. Most importantly, the anonymous feedback surveys overflow with comments like, "Finally feel welcome," and treated with genuine respect. Brenda's consequences extended far beyond losing her job. Criminal charges for filing false official reports resulted in 6 months probation and community service. The civil judgment for my legal fees forced her to liquidate assets, including the SUV that had started our conflict. Her husband requested transfer to a different base, citing the untenable social situation her actions had created. The house went up for sale within 2 months, purchased by a young Navy family who actually wave when they see me working in my yard. The ripple effects of institutional change reached beyond housing coordination. Colonel Hayes recommended me for regional training after our discrimination complaint rate became a model for other installations. The efficiency improvements I'd implemented, streamlined application processes, transparent assignment criteria, regular community feedback sessions were adopted base-wide as examples of how military services should support diverse families. My personal life found unexpected richness in the aftermath of professional vindication. The community garden project I'd proposed during my interview became reality on unused land behind the housing complex, with families from different backgrounds working together to grow everything from tomatoes to cultural heritage vegetables that reminded deployed service members of home. The smell of fresh soil mixed with diverse cooking aromas during harvest festivals created the kind of community Brenda had always claimed to want, but never actually fostered. The Mustang restoration finally reached completion, taking first place at the annual base car show, where military families and contractors mingled around classic engines and shared stories that had nothing to do with housing disputes or neighborhood hierarchies. Chuck and I started a weekend automotive club that became surprisingly popular with teenagers who needed positive mentorship and adults who missed working with their hands. Perhaps most satisfying, I established the Base Housing Community Scholarship Fund using efficiency savings from streamlined operations. The program provides educational assistance for military children, with selection based purely on merit and need, rather than family connections or social standing. Last month, we awarded our first scholarship to David Owen's daughter, who's studying computer science despite her father's career disruption that Brenda had caused. The annual Community Unity Festive. Al replaced the tense, exclusive gatherings that had characterized neighborhood social life under Brenda's reign. Families contribute dishes representing their heritage. Children play games that don't depend on housing status or parent rank. And the evening always ends with live music performed by service members who found their creative voices in an environment that celebrates diversity rather than demanding conformity. My relationship with the community evolved from contractor-outsider to trusted leader. But the real victory lies in watching military families relax into an environment where fairness isn't revolutionary. It's simply expected. Housing assignments happen based on need and availability rather than personal preferences or prejudices. Complaint procedures work transparently without fear of retaliation. Children play together without their parents worrying about neighborhood politics. The lesson I share with other contractors and military families facing similar harassment situations always comes back to documentation, community building, and professional excellence. Bullies rely on isolation and intimidation, but they crumble when confronted with organized evidence and united opposition. Sometimes the best revenge truly is massive success that makes your opponent's position irrelevant. Last week, I received notification of another promotion opportunity, regional housing coordinator position that would oversee multiple installations. The recommendation letter from Colonel Hayes mentioned my exceptional ability to transform toxic environments into thriving communities, and my demonstrated commitment to treating all service members and their families with dignity and respect. Looking back, Brenda's harassment campaign had inadvertently prepared me for exactly the kind of leadership challenge that military communities need. Her attempts to destroy my life had forced me to develop skills, relationships, and perspectives that made me genuinely excellent at the job she'd lost through her own misconduct. If you've got your own HOA or neighborhood nightmare story, drop it in the comments. I read every single one and learned something new about how communities can either support or destroy each other. And if this story helped you think differently about handling workplace bullies or institutional harassment, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thanks for watching from wherever you are. This community keeps growing, and your support makes these stories possible.